Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm doing my January wrap-up, and in January I completed 7 books. I had a couple of standouts, but I feel like a lot of the books kind of fell into a 3-star range, but like for some of the books 3 stars was a good thing, and for some of them 3 stars was a bad thing. So once again, my rating system just making 0 sense. But yeah, I also had 2 DNFs, which one of them was actually like the first book that I started in 2021, which usually I'm like very particular about what's going to be my first book of the year because I feel like it kind of sets the tone for the year. So I try to pick something that I feel like is a safe bet, and this year it did not pan out the way that I thought it would, and I ended up DNFing it. But I'm trying to like rationalize it for myself and convince myself that this is actually setting a good tone for the year, because I did not force myself to read a book that I was not into, and this year I'm going to DNF with abandon and not read books I'm not enjoying. So I'm gonna pretend like it was still setting a good tone for the year. But speaking of which, so this time I'm gonna start with my DNFs. Usually I put them at the end of the video, but this time we're putting them at the beginning. See how that goes. So the first book that I DNF'd in January was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, and then the second one was The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. And both of these will be in my winter DNFs video that will be coming out, I guess, in March. But if you want to know a little bit about why I DNF'd this one, I did briefly talk about it in my most recent vlog, so I'll link that below if you want a little more information before March about why I DNF'd Dragonbone Chair. Okay, so now getting into the books that I actually completed in January. The first book that I finished was The Weight of the Stars by Kay Ankrum, and I will have a full review for this coming out soon, so I'm going to talk about this pretty briefly. But this is a YA kind of sci-fi because it does take place in like a near future, and there have maybe been some technological advances, there's been a little more space exploration, but it's not anything that seems like extremely different from where we are now. And also the main characters and main plot of this don't really interact with the like any advanced technology or space exploration that has happened. It's more just like information that we have about the world, because most of this takes place in a small town with high school kids, or following our main character Ryan, who has kind of this found family of like social outcasts at her school. A new girl comes to school and is having trouble fitting in, so one of the teachers asks Ryan to kind of take this girl under her wing and befriend her, which is a thing that Ryan regularly does, is that she kind of like finds people who are struggling at the school and sort of brings them into this friend group. And so she agrees and goes about this in kind of unconventional ways maybe, but eventually befriends this girl. They find out that this girl actually has a connection to a space exploration mission that had a lot of publicity when it first happened, which was like maybe 15 or 16 years ago, because her mother was one of the astronauts who was on that like space mission. And so she's trying to intercept any radio transmissions that she can that might possibly be from her mother. And so now that she's a part of this friend group, they decide to help her on this mission of like finding out what has happened to her mother. And I really enjoyed this. This ended up being a really good way to start the year, after my initial DNF of Addie LaRue. But yeah, I really liked the writing in this. There's something about it that was just really easily consumable. I read this entire book in one day, which like it's not a super long book, but for me that's relatively uncommon. I tend to get distracted pretty easily when I'm reading, so really like sitting down and reading an entire book in one day is pretty uncommon for me, and I just like really flew through this. And I think part of it is because the writing is just so easily consumable, but also because I really liked the characters in this and I wanted to know what happened to them. So yeah, it definitely has like a found family trope. It has these characters that I think are very endearing, and I just really enjoyed them. There is a female-female romance at the center of this that is like very slow build, like very slow, but it's like antagonist to friends to lovers. And I really enjoyed that romance in this. So there were a lot of things about this that I really liked, and I gave this 4.5 stars. Next, I read Blanca Erroja by Anna Marie McLemore, and I buddy read this with Jocelyn from Yogi with a Book. This is a YA magical realism that's kind of a retelling of Snow White and Rose Red, and then also a little bit of Swan Lake. So in it, we're following actually 4 main characters, which I wasn't expecting. I thought we were only following 2, but the 2 like main characters are the sisters Blanca and Roja. Their family generations ago made a deal with some magical swans because they wanted a daughter, and so the swans made a deal with them that everyone in their family, when they had children, would have 2 daughters, and one of the daughters they would get to keep, and one of the daughters would go live with the swans and like become a swan. And so Blanca and Roja are afraid of being separated. They don't know which one is going to be claimed by the swans. And then the other 2 perspectives that we have are these 2 boys that live in the town near them, that are Paige and Yearling, and they both are kind of having some difficulties with their families, and they have become really close friends. And when one of them kind of decides to leave his family behind and disappear into the woods, the other one follows him, and then both of them are kind of absorbed by this like magical forest, and then that eventually leads them to finding the 2 sisters, and these 4 characters kind of coming together right around this time when Blanca and Roja are expecting the swans to take one of them. And this book I ended up not enjoying as much as I was hoping to. I have read, I think, 2 books from this author previously and really liked them, and this one just like didn't work for me. Now, some of the things I did like about it are, of course, I really liked the writing in this. Anna Marie McLemore's writing is always really lovely and beautiful. There is especially a scene that I loved when one of the characters is being like absorbed into this magical forest that is just like great forest vibes. Like, I loved it. So the writing is always great. I also really liked some things about some of the characters. I really liked Paige's character. Paige is just a type of character that I really enjoy, who is both like confident and also like bashful, and is just this like really endearing type of character. And he has a romance with one of the sisters that I thought was really sweet, and I really liked their dynamic, and like the way that he flirts with her I just think is so cute, and it's just like very soft. But I also really liked that Paige as a character is very observant and really understands other people and the other characters, and I felt like my greatest understanding of the other characters came through his eyes. And that was like both a good thing and a bad thing, because as I said, I really liked how observant this character was and how he like understood other people, and I felt gave me greater insight into those other characters. But it was not a great thing in that that was necessary, because I didn't feel like I understood the characters on their own. Another issue that I had with it was the relationship between the sisters, because I went into this kind of expecting it to have like a lot about family dynamics, but especially sisters and sister relationships, and it just didn't really feel like it had that. I felt like it focused more than I wanted it to on the romances, because these characters do kind of just like pair up, and it focused quite a bit on that. And then when it came to the sister relationship, I very much felt like the story was just telling me like they're sisters and they love each other and they'll do anything for each other. It felt very surface level. A lot of the plot of this also hinges on a miscommunication between the sisters, which could have like very easily been fixed if they had like taken 2 seconds to talk to each other, but they don't. And I just found that really frustrating. There was a lot about the plot that just felt like there were some plot conveniences, there were things that felt very disjointed and irrelevant about the plot. Also, for a book that the plot so much revolves around these like magical swans taking away one of the sisters, there was surprisingly little about the swans. Whenever they did interact with the swans, which was pretty rarely, but whenever they did, the swans never felt magical, they never felt menacing, they never felt like anything other than regular swans. And so in the scenes when the sisters would like go out and be like talking to the swans, who like never respond because they're birds, I was just like, you're just yelling at a bunch of birds. Like, I don't believe that these are magical swans. I think you're just yelling at a bunch of birds. So that was kind of frustrating. I also really didn't like the way it ended because, again, at the end there were so many things that I just was like, why did this happen? Or things felt like kind of pointless, like something would happen and then it was like, so this whole section that I just read didn't matter. There were a lot of things that just felt accidental about the way that it ended. And then also it felt like nothing changed or was achieved in the story for the characters. Like, none of the characters seemed to really grow or change. So there were, as I said, a couple of things that I enjoyed about this. Most of it I was just kind of along for the ride, enjoying the writing and like enjoying the moments of Paige's character that I got. But I gave this 2.5 stars. Next, I read A Morbid Taste of Bones by Ellis Peters. This is the first book in a series of cozy mysteries that are in a medieval setting, where we are following a monk who solves mysteries, and I read this as part of the Genre Raiders book club. I've never read a cozy mystery before, so I thought it would be fun to try this one out, and also I was like, if I'm going to enjoy a cozy mystery, I feel like one that's like following a monk in like medieval Europe solving mysteries seems like one that I would enjoy. It's just because that's like a setting that I already like. And I did enjoy this. So, okay, the plot of this is that following Brother Cadfael, who is one of the monks, and I think before becoming a monk, he maybe was like a soldier or something. And so his previous experience like traveling and being a soldier is part of what helps him like solve these crimes. But his abbey has decided that they need a patron saint, and they are kind of in the market for a new saint when one of the brothers has a vision that this saint has like come to him and said that she will be the patron saint of their abbey, but she is a Welsh saint and they have to travel to Wales to like retrieve her bones. So they set out to Wales, to this like remote mountain village, to get her bones, and they are like trying to negotiate with the locals to be able to take the bones back to their abbey, but the locals don't want to allow that to happen because this is their like local patron saint. And while these negotiations are going on, someone from the village is murdered, and that becomes the central like murder mystery that Cadfael is trying to solve. And this one I don't have like really strong feelings about. Overall, I feel very like positively towards it. I did enjoy it. It was fun to read a cozy mystery, and now I feel like I get more like what it means that it's a cozy mystery, because it had a very cozy feel to it. And like I generally had fun reading it. I liked the writing and the setting, and I definitely had like atmosphere to it that I enjoyed. But I don't know if I was like super invested in it. It wasn't the kind of book that I like even remembered I was reading. Like I listened to the audiobook, which I really enjoyed the audiobook, and I started reading it and then kind of forgot about it for a period of time because it just wasn't a plot or characters that really drew me back to it. But then every time I started listening to it, I enjoyed it a lot. I don't think it's necessarily a series that I'm going to like actively be reading and count as like a series I'm like, oh, I want to like, you know, read the next one. But I definitely would consider reading more in the series, especially if I want something that's just like a quick, easy read, something that is just gonna be like kind of cozy and fun, maybe between like other longer, denser, darker books. So yeah, I can definitely see myself maybe picking up the next book at some point, but it's not something I'm gonna be like actively reading this series. And I gave this one 3 stars, but this is the book that I was like, to me, this one 3 stars is like a good thing, that I was like, yeah, gave it 3 stars. It was fun, but pretty neutral. Next, I read Shards of Honor by Lois McMaster-Bujold, which is part of her Vorkosigan series, which is a very long sci-fi series that was not written in like internal chronological order, and so there are differing opinions about what order you should read the books, if you read them in like chronological order of the world or publication order. I found a like article that had like a list of what order they suggested reading it in, so I just decided to go with that. I'll link it below if anybody else wants to know about it. But yeah, so this is the first one that I read in this series. And to be honest, I don't remember a whole lot about it. It wasn't super memorable to me for some reason. So in this, our main character, whose name is Cordelia, I think. Clearly this didn't stick in my brain very well. But she is like on a planet on some kind of like research mission when she finds out that her like team who's on this mission with her has been killed, or part of them escaped, I think, and part of them have been killed. But she's pretty much stranded on this planet now by herself when she encounters this guy Vorkosigan, who's like from this other, I guess, planet or empire or something that is enemies with hers, but the two of them end up kind of banding together to survive because they've both been like stranded on this planet. He's been like betrayed by his own people, and so they're working together to like get back to some place where they'll be able to like survive and like set things right. And then while they are traveling together and working together, they kind of get to know each other better and fall for each other. There is a romance between the two of them. But it is very much like the way Lois McMaster-Bujold does her romances, I feel like are just very, I don't know, they're very just like matter of fact and like pragmatic in the way that she writes romances, which like is not necessarily the most angsty, but I find them like very funny in the way that the characters are just like very pragmatic about falling in love with each other, and I enjoy that about them. Yeah, so I don't know, not a lot about the actual plot of the book beyond the basic setup has really like stuck in my mind. And this one, I gave this 3 stars also. And I think that if it had been a writer from an author that I didn't know previously, I probably would not continue with the series. I probably will read more from this series, at least 1 or 2 more books, to see like if I get more into it as I spend more time with these characters. But yeah, that is mostly like going on faith because I already know and like this author. But if it had been an author that I didn't already like, I probably wouldn't have continued it because it just like didn't grab me. Next, I read The Story of Silence by Alex Myers. This is a retelling of an old French legend that I had never heard about before learning about this book. But in this, there is a king who has decreed that women cannot inherit land or titles or anything like that. And so we, at the beginning, are kind of following this man who was recently married into an earldom through his wife, but because women can't inherit, if they don't have a son, then the earldom will not stay in their family and be like passed down through their children. And so when the wife gets pregnant, they decide that no matter what, they're going to tell everybody that they have a son so that that child can inherit. And it turns out that the baby is born a girl, and in keeping with their plan, they tell everyone that they've had a son and then send the baby away from court to grow up kind of isolated and be raised as a boy. And then that becomes the character that we are primarily following, whose name is Silence, and we're following Silence as they are growing up and discovering what their gender is, who they want to be, also because they want to be a knight and what that means for them. And what all of this is meaning in this like medieval world. And this book, I ended up feeling more neutral about it than I was expecting to, I guess. because from the premise, I was expecting to like really love this, and I did enjoy this, but I don't know, I just ended up feeling a little more neutral towards it than I was expecting. This is a very slow-paced book. There is a long period of it that is kind of just setup and not even like the main storyline, because there's a lot of backstory that's given of like how the laws of inheritance come into being, how the father comes to be marrying into this earldom, then like his marriage and Silence's birth, and like that's all like in there. So it takes a while to even get to the point where like Silence is alive and we are following our main character. Then a lot more of this actually ended up following Silence as a child than I was expecting it to. And so it actually is much more of like following Silence as like a child and adolescent, and I guess I was expecting it to be following them more as an adult. So some of the like pacing of it was a little funny to me, or just not what I was expecting out of it. This does have some discussion of like nature versus nurture and how that idea is affecting the main character and their identity and their gender identity specifically. And the main character essentially ends up identifying as what I guess would be like non-binary. That term isn't used in the book because it's like in a medieval setting, but I think that would probably be the closest to how Silence ends up like identifying at the end of the book. The way it is described still uses very like binary terms for how Silence is understanding their gender, but I guess that somewhat makes sense considering that it is in this like medieval setting, and Silence wouldn't just like magically have you know, the modern terminology that we have for talking about gender, and so they were using the terminology that would have existed at the time, which was very binary. So yeah, overall I did enjoy this. I would consider reading something else from this author, but I gave this 3.5 stars. Next, I read Alatsue by Darcy Littlebadger. I ended up actually reading this as an audiobook, but I have the physical book as well, which I am really happy about just because I really love the way this book feels for some reason. There's something very satisfying about like the physical experience of this book. Anyways, this is a YA fantasy that is set in a world very similar to our own, but it does have magic and different magical beings. And in this, our main character is Alatsue, whose family is Apache, and from their Apache heritage, she has inherited the ability to raise ghosts. And so she has a little ghost dog companion who is super cute. And at the beginning of the book, one of her cousins dies and then comes to her in a dream and tells her that he was murdered and tells her the name of his murderer. So she knows that it was a murder, but the police are saying that it was an accident and they are not investigating it anymore. So she decides that it is up to her, and she goes on a mission to solve her cousin's murder and figure out how to prove that it was this person that he like named in this dream. And then along the way, she kind of unearths this larger like conspiracy, not exactly a conspiracy, but this larger thing that's going on beneath the surface. And I really enjoyed this. I'm not usually a big mysteries person, but I just really liked the characters in this. I liked Alatsue a lot and how like dedicated she was and determined she was to figuring this out. I loved her little ghost dog. He was so cute. I wish he had been in it even more. Like, he was in it quite a bit, but I was just like, more ghost dog. I really liked her friend, that one of her friends helps her out in this like investigation, and I really enjoyed him and their friendship, and they were just like really cute friends together. I liked that her family was very involved in this. It wasn't a YA that like just kind of ignored the family. I thought it was an interesting world also. There are like vampires in this world, which is, for some reason, I was not expecting there to be vampires, but there are vampires and ghosts and like other kinds of magical beings in it. And the way that the magic works is really interesting. I think there are some things about the way the magic works, and especially the way her connection to her Apache heritage works that were really cool and like clever, and I just really enjoyed so many aspects of this, and I had a really fun time reading it. It felt very like cozy to me, and I feel like it's maybe on like the younger end of YA, but it just had like this really like fun cozy feel to it that I really enjoyed, and I gave this 4 stars. And lastly, I read Across the Green Grass Fields by Sean McGuire. This is the 6th book in the Wayward Children series, which is a series of novellas that follows children who have escaped into magical portal worlds, and these magical worlds are like perfectly suited to their individual personalities. It is the perfect place for them where they can be their most themselves, but then a lot of them end up being like kicked out and end up back in our world, and when they do that, they end up at the School for Wayward Children. And so in this series, every other book is following like a kind of current timeline that partially takes place at the School for Wayward Children, and then every other book takes place in one of these magical worlds and is kind of giving backstory to one of the characters. So this is one that is taking place in one of the magical worlds. So at the beginning of this, it starts in our world, and we're following our main character Reagan, who at the beginning I think is maybe around 10 or 11 years old, and she has just recently found out that she is intersex, and some of the kids at school are bullying her about this, and so one day she runs away from school and is intending to just kind of wander around and have some time to herself, but accidentally ends up going through one of these magical doors and ends up in Hoofland, which is this world of hoofed creatures, and especially horses, and she kind of gets taken in by a family of centaurs and finds out that she may have some greater destiny in Hoofland to save Hoofland from something, but she doesn't know what. And I really enjoyed this. I think that with this one, like, I feel like at this point I kind of understand what the series is about more than I did with the previous books, because one of the complaints that I had about previous books is that they would kind of skip or skim over the more like plot focused parts of the story, where they just go like, and then they went on an adventure and like had like, all these adventures and like killed these monsters and blah blah blah. And I would always be like, I would have liked to have seen that. I wanted to see the adventure part, but that's really not the point of the series. It's really about these characters like finding themselves and how to be their truest selves, and what it means to like find people or places that feel like home. So yeah, a lot of this felt like it didn't have much of a plot to it, and then the actual like part that involved saving Hoofland happened really quickly, and it felt a little glossed over at the end. But with this one, that didn't bother me, because I feel like at this point I've kind of realized like that's not the point of the story. So yeah, I ended up really enjoying it. I like the really distinct voice that Sean McGuire has in her writing, but especially I feel like in this series it has a very particular tone to it. I really like the atmosphere of it. You know, it has this really great like pastoral kind of atmosphere, because it's following these like centaurs who then like the centaurs herd unicorns. So yeah, there's just like a lot of things about this that I thought were really fun, and I gave this one 4 stars. So that is all for my January wrap up. If you have read any of these books, I'd love to chat with you in the comments about them. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!